After 17 years as a professional bass player, I've learned that 95% of bass playing problems can be solved by learning one skill: recovering when you make a mistake. The key to doing this isn't trying to make your mistakes sound intentional or trying to trick your audience into thinking that you meant them, or even just pretending like nothing happened. Making a strong recovery is a matter of doing three simple things that I have learned from playing over 2,500 pro bass gigs. And once these click, you'll never be thrown off by another mistake again. So what is the first one? So a lot of my students worry about making mistakes when they play live. And as such, they will ask me things like, oh, how do I make my mistakes sound intentional? If I make a mistake, can I just repeat it again and again until it sounds like I meant it? And in fairness to them, there is a lot of advice online out there that suggests they do exactly that. But in my experience, repeating mistakes to try and make them sound intentional is actually terrible advice. Let me explain why. But quick side note before I show you that, if you struggle with problems like this in your bass playing, then I walk through how to fix them step by step and so many other problems in my free email series, 30 Days to Gig Level Bass Playing. It's linked below, it's really good and it's free. So go down there, pick that up and then come back for the rest of this. So imagine going out to a restaurant for dinner and ordering steak. But when the waiter comes out with your food, they give you a plate of chicken and they say, oh, sorry, I know you ordered steak, but I also know you really wanted chicken. Now, obviously you would complain and send the food back right away. But imagine if they just came back with a plate of chicken again. Now you would be even more annoyed. Why? Because you know that's not what you ordered. And this is exactly what happens when bass players try to make mistakes sound intentional by repeating them. Let me explain. If a band leader or an artist hires you to play their music, which for argument's sake sounds like this, they already know what their music is supposed to sound like. And if you hit a wrong note when you're playing it, that's fine. Mistakes happen. But if you make a mistake, simply repeating it again and again will not convince them that somehow their own music has magically changed without them knowing. Just like in the restaurant example, it usually makes things much worse. And it doesn't actually stop there. Think about what this will look like from the perspective of the audience that has paid to see you. The chances are your audience is probably not musically trained. So when you make a mistake, they won't sit there and think, oh, the bass player got something wrong there. Instead, what they will probably think is, something is wrong with this entire band. So if you're trying to disguise your mistakes by just repeating them enough times or trying to make them sound intentional, what you're actually doing is making the entire group sound worse. And that is the exact opposite of what a bass player is meant to do. So the first step to better recoveries from mistakes is simple. Stop trying to trick your audience or your bandmates into thinking that you meant them. But this does raise a really important question. If you do make a mistake on a gig, how do you actually recover from it? In my experience, there are two things that work incredibly well. In a minute, we'll look at a way of turning wrong notes into ones that sound really musical and that work really well in the song. But before I can show you that, you first need to understand something that's even more important: how to reduce the chances of a mistake happening in the first place. Because once you know how to do that, it becomes much easier to stay calm and recover well when a mistake does actually happen. And back in November of 2016, I learned a perfect lesson about how to do exactly that. So in November 2016, I got called to play a press event for a new West End musical, Bat Out of Hell, the musical. Obviously, I wanted to avoid making mistakes on the actual gig, so before the first rehearsal, I asked if there were any scores that I could prep ahead of time. Now, at the time, I thought, like a lot of my students do and a lot of bass players do, that if I just learn the bass lines perfectly, I will be bulletproof on the gig. But it didn't work out like that. No scores were available beforehand, and we would be sight reading on the day. However, I was told the names of the songs that we would be playing. So I made a Spotify playlist of these songs, listened to them as much as I could before the first rehearsal. And whilst that might sound like a small thing, in terms of keeping you calm and minimizing mistakes on the day, it was actually a bit of a blessing in disguise. Here's why. A lot of the time we panic about mistakes because we're afraid of getting lost, of being exposed and letting the band down. So we compensate by trying to learn our part better and better. But what you might not realize is that type of preparation actually makes things worse when you do eventually make a mistake. Because you stop listening to the band, you start focusing only on yourself, and that's when everything starts to snowball. You get lost because you're no longer listening to the band, and then one mistake simply causes causes another. But if you've listened deeply to the music beforehand, it's much easier to orient yourself and recover from a mistake because you know where the music is headed overall. If you know what the vocal melody sounds like in a verse or a chorus, if you know what the lyrics are, where the guitars enter or drop out when a chorus arrives, all those things serve as a kind of geography of the song, and they will help you navigate your way through it even when something unexpected happens. This isn't a saying I came up with, but it is something I tell my students all the time, which is that on a gig, you don't rise to the occasion. Instead, you fall to the level of your preparation. And one of my old teachers really summed this up perfectly when they told me, always learn the music, not just your part. And that is why minimizing mistakes and staying calm often begins with deep listening to a set of songs and understanding the whole musical picture before a gig even begins. However, there is still one problem left to solve. Preparation like this is all well and good, but it will count for nothing if you aren't able to actually recover on a gig when you make a mistake. So if you are playing a song and you hit a wrong note, what should you actually do? Well, I actually found out the perfect recovery technique a few months after this when we started the full run of Bat Out of Hell in Manchester. So let me show you that technique next. So I'm going to demonstrate this with a song from the show called Dead Ringer for Love, which is also on the Cast album that we recorded. Also, whilst we're here, massive shout out to the whole cast, the whole band, the whole musical team. Everyone in the production was absolutely awesome. So with this tune especially, we were encouraged to open up, to improvise and interact with each other as long as it was done tastefully. But the risk that comes with doing this is that sometimes you will make mistakes. And inevitably, one night we're playing through the show, and when we get to Dead Ringer for Love, I hit a wrong note. Now, instead of stopping or panicking or pretending like I meant it, I kept playing, I built a line out of this mistake and resolved it into the next chord because I thought that was just the best that I could do. But then after the show, a few people came up to me and they said, oh, I really like what you did in that song. And that taught me a really valuable lesson about how to recover from mistakes in the middle of a gig. Victor Wooten famously says that you're never more than a half step away from a right note. Now, that is great advice, but in the context of normal everyday rhythm section bass playing, I think it needs to go one step further. Because ultimately, whether a fill, a line, or even a mistake ends up sounding like a good bit of music has much less to do with how the thing starts and almost everything to do with how it finishes and resolves. Yes, moving a half step can help you find a better note, and that's a great start. But in my experience, that's often just half the job done. As you can hear in that example, it still sounds a little clunky and like it really lacks musical intention. But if I play that same passage again, making the same mistake, but this time focus on building a line out of it and resolving it into the main chord or back into the main bass line, it suddenly sounds much more musical. The way I think about it is that in the same way that a sentence in a language like English will only make sense once it's finished, a line, a fill, or even something you build out of a mistake can only sound good once it's been resolved. So if you hit a bad note, take Victor's advice and move a half step to find a good note. But once you've done that, focus then on resolving that back into the main line. And if you've done the listening step that we talked about in step 2, you will find it much easier to orient yourself in this way when you are making those kind of mistakes. And once you build that reflex and it really clicks in your playing, it becomes much easier to stay calm and recover well when you do make a mistake. However, now you've got a new problem. Recovering from mistakes will count for absolutely nothing if you aren't also able to hold down a rhythm section with real musical authority. Luckily, there's one concept you can learn that will teach you exactly how to do this, and I've done a full video breakdown on how this was done on one of the biggest albums of the last 20 years. So to learn that concept, click up here and watch this video next.